Solidarity, comrades. Today, as the title clearly states, we are going to talk about exactly what Hoxhaism is, named after the late and great Enver Hoxha. To start this video off, though, I feel like we have to start from the beginning. We have to start with the origin of the man, the origin of that party, and the origin of socialism in Albania. So here it goes. Enver Hoxha was a partisan during World War II that fought along with the other communists and Albanian nationalists against the fascist Nazi invasion of Albania. And they succeeded. They had national liberation of Albania post World War II after the defeat of the Nazis, and after that, the Albanian Party of Labor was able to become the vanguard party of Albania, setting up a socialist state that lasted until the end of the Cold War. Enver Hoxha lived until the 80s. I'm not sure. I think it's either 1980, 1984, somewhere along those lines. Someone down below, please correct me. But Enver Hoxha followed the line of the Marxist-Leninist line of Stalin and Lenin and that group. What makes Enver Hoxha different than most other Eastern Bloc Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War is that after the death of Stalin, he absolutely fought against the revisionism of the USSR under Khrushchev and post-Khrushchev and the capitalist roadsters and Marxist revisionists within that party. So he held very firm to the scientific socialist stance of Marxism-Leninism, which is great. And he did great things in Albania, and the Albania leading the Albanian Party of Labor. They built great socialism, very strong country when it comes to a socialist country. They were able to, combat against the hegemony of the revisionist USSR. There's a lot of great writings of Enver Hoxha actually meeting with the Soviet officials after Stalin's death, with explaining his great concern, especially with characters such as Khrushchev, and it, turned out to be true, which shows that he does have a keen eye for revisionism, and he also is a great adherent to Marxism-Leninism. And what Hoxha became famous for was this anti-revisionist stance. He did not forgo the ultimate goal of Marxism-Leninism in favor of capitalist roadsterism. Now, we go into what is Hoxhaism. Well, Hoxhaism, I hope I'm saying that right, was a strain of Marxism-Leninism that occurred, that manifested itself during the Cold War era post-Stalin. So, excuse the noise in the background. Don't worry about it. And post-Stalin, he kept on adhering to this Marxist-Leninist stance, and that was that. Now, why do people identify themselves as Hoxhists if it's just Marxism-Leninism? Well, unfortunately, in the post-Stalin era, Marxism-Leninism was appropriated. That term was appropriated by revisionists. In reality, we can call it. Now we can see that the USSR was a revisionist state and post-Stalin, and that all Enver Hoxha and the Albanian Party of Labor was doing was adhering to the scientific socialist stance. So during the Cold War era, many communist parties across the world started referring to themselves as Hoxhists to differentiate themselves from the revisionist camp of Marxism-Leninism upheld by the revisionist USSR. Now, to give you a little bit of history, I have made a video about the Sino-Soviet split, but after the Sino-Soviet split, Enver Hoxha decided to ally himself with the People's Republic of China, being very impressed with their Great Leap Forward era, being greatly impressed with their anti-revisionist stance. Now that did end whenever he had a great disagreement with the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And if you read any of Enver Hoxha's writings criticizing the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, that is where me, myself, and many other Maoists, and I think even some Marxist-Leninists, if they're honest, find it to be unfounded, mostly straw men, even a tinge of racism. I don't want to slander Hoxha too much because he was a fantastic Marxist revolutionary and a fascist killer, so I really like him. But what we can gather in this modern day, in the post-Cold War era, that when people identify and parties identify themselves as Hoxhists, it's still in that Cold War mindset of we're not revisionist Marxist-Leninists, we are actual Marxist-Leninists, no true Scotsman, but they show it through practice. Enver Hoxha, while he did not contribute too much to theory, he did very much contribute to the practice of socialism. And as Mao said, correct ideas come from practice. And we learned a lot of correct ideas from from socialist Albania and the practice put in by the party. So, modern day Hoxhists still identify themselves as Hoxhists against other revisionist parties. For example, in America, I don't live in America now, but in America there is a party called the Communist Party USA that identify as Marxist-Leninists, and they are very much revisionist liberals. They're not even revisionists, they're just straight up liberals. And so you find that a lot of people, to differentiate themselves from this revisionist stance, call themselves Hoxhists. I don't think that label is necessary. I think that calling yourself a Marxist-Leninist and showing it through your practice, showing it through your theories is enough. But that is where that whole idea comes from. Hoxhism is essentially Marxism-Leninism as it should be. And me as a Marxist-Leninist Maoist see that Marxism-Leninism as it should be as an essential basis to my revolutionary theory. And I 99% agree with most Marxist-Leninists. I feel like Marxism-Leninism, without Marxism-Leninism, there is no Marxist-Leninist Maoism. It's as simple as that. So, when it comes down to it, if you want to identify as an anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist, you should not call yourself a Hoxhist. You should call yourself a Marxist-Leninist, a scientific socialist. And whenever people question that, showing examples of revisionist parties, you should say, explain to them that that's revisionist. I'm anti-revisionist, much as Enver Hoxha. So that's where his words can come into the theory of Marxism-Leninism in combating revisionism across all revisionist parties. Now, many people have asked me what I think of Enver Hoxha, and I think that he was a great Marxist, a great revolutionary. He applied scientific socialism to Albania, and socialist Albania is proof of how that works. Until the imperialist end of the Cold War, the imperialists sort of helped collapse that system outside of his power. One anti-revisionist state in all of Eastern Europe that wasn't under the hegemonic power of the USSR. Even though you have Marxists like, for example, in the German Democratic Republic, you had Erich Honecker. He was a true Marxist-Leninist as well, but he did not have the ability to go it on his own without the support of the revisionist USSR and the rest of the revisionist parties in the Eastern Bloc, or the Warsaw Pact, as it was. Right now, I think that calling yourself a Hoxhaist is a good way to say, hey, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but I'm not one of the revisionist Marxist-Leninists. So I have no issue with someone calling themselves a Hoxhaist. Whenever I see someone identify as a Hoxhaist, I see them as a comrade. And I think that Hoxhaism, while it didn't give much to theory, it gave a lot to practice. And that practice can certainly be learned from. This video is pretty short, but I just wanted to give a quick rundown of what I thought about it, a quick, brief history, spitballing a brief history of who Enver Hoxha was and what the idea of Hoxhaism is. And I think someone identifies as a Hoxhaist, they are compatible with any other revisionist or anti-revisionist Marxist groups, such as Marxist-Leninist Maoists, or they are Marxist-Leninists, but Marxist-Leninist Maoists and Marxism-Leninism is very much compatible within a vanguard party. You see a lot of Marxist-Leninists even accepting the theoretical and practical advances of Mao Zedong. They may not identify as Maoists such as I do, but they do not discount the contributions of his theories as such. So within a vanguard party that operates under democratic centralism, that Marxist-Leninists, Maoists, especially in imperialist nations, have no issues when it comes to working together and fighting together. The issue is when it comes to the third world, the countries that are victims of imperialism. You see that the material conditions for these nations in the third world, they cannot go about the same method of doing revolution as the original of Marxism-Leninism, because the material conditions do not exist. They have to apply Maoist practice to their revolution. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to succeed. So you see the Communist Party of the Philippines making great gains using the protracted People's War and the Maoist line. You see the Naxalabri, or the Naxalites, whatever you like to call them, the Maoists in India making great gains holding the Maoist line. You see a successful revolution in Nepal applying in 2006, even though I don't agree with their application of victory. They could have done much better in that respect. They created a multi-party state, which I'm not a big fan of. But you see the successful revolutions in countries that are victims of imperialism coming not from the orthodox Marxist-Leninist stance, but from I shouldn't say orthodox, I guess I can say orthodox, from the original Marxist-Leninist stance. You see very few of those post-Cold War. And there's a reason for that, in my opinion. It's because I believe that People's War, in the Maoist sense, is essential to people in the third world conducting successful revolutions. And you will find very, very few Marxist-Leninists that disagree with that. But at the end of the day, Marxism-Leninism and Marxist-Leninism-Maoism is essentially the same thing, barring a few means of practice. And I think that in the first and second world, former second world nations such as Russia, former Eastern Bloc, even Greece, the Balkans, you see that, and I feel like that to do revolution in those countries, that Marxism-Leninism is an absolutely key feature of doing revolution. Now, I'm not saying that Marxist-Leninists do not attempt to do revolution in countries that are victims of imperialism. I'm not saying that. I'm just looking at the level of success of the protracted People's War. I'm looking at the level of success of applying Maoist thought to doing revolution. Now, when it comes to building socialism, there's very little difference between a Marxist-Leninist Maoist and a Marxist-Leninist. So I think within the confines of a democratic centralist party, vanguard party that holds a Leninist line, there should be no issues with Marxist-Leninist Maoists and Marxist-Leninists working together. And I think the whole label of Hoxhaism is starting to become outdated. I'm not saying we should stop learning about Enver Hoxha, because there's a lot to learn from that. But I feel like that calling yourself a Hoxhaist is sort of outdated. That might be controversial, I don't know. But I feel like just calling yourself a Marxist-Leninist in this modern day and age and showing that you have a scientific knowledge of what Marxism-Leninism is, as opposed to what revisionist Marxism-Leninism is from the Khrushchevites on in the USSR and some former Warsaw Pact countries, that Hoxhaism, it was, I lost my train of thought, but Hoxhaism was a necessity in these places to differentiate yourselves from the revisionist strains. And you have parties like in Russia, the main Communist Party, the very popular one that always gains seats inside their state Duma, is a revisionist party. I mean, their leader said they should they should really look into Jengism and stuff like that. And I feel like that, in countries like that, calling yourself a Hoxhaist is much more viable. And then you have parties in, a good example is Turkey. You have parties in Turkey where you have many were Marxist-Leninists, were Maoists, were libertarian socialists. You know, you have a lot of, in eastern Turkey, in the Kurdistan region, you have a lot of these people, a lot of differences. I think that that's also a good example where using Hoxhaism as a label is good to differentiate yourself from the more impotent Marxist-Leninists, or maybe the revisionist Marxist-Leninists. But I think at the end of the day, the theory and practice that you uphold as a party should ultimately label yourself, especially if you're a Marxist-Leninist, showing through practice and your theory and your writings and what you do. That should be the ultimate identifier of whether or not this person is or this party is anti-revisionist or not. But Enver Hoxha was a great man. He made great contributions to practice, not so much to theory, but he helped build socialism. The people that he led helped build socialism in Albania, and his contributions should never be forgot. Now, I hope this, helped you understand who Enver Hoxha was if you didn't already know, or what Hoxhaism is. It's basically anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninism. And labels are not. I think that it's still important to, archive something like this and to talk about something like this. But if people in the comments want to talk about Enver Hoxha, and if you think I'm wrong, please let me know. I would love. I'm all about self-criticism. And yeah, that's all I have to say for now. Solidarity, comrades, and have a good one.